man's name was or where he worked, because I'm sure he died. I remember when the ambulance finally got up here, we lifted him up onto the gurney, and I kept stroking his arm as we were going to the ambulance, and I kept saying, "You'll be all right. You'll be all right." No, he wouldn't be. So I wish I could have found his family to tell them that he was not alone in those moments. That people had been with him. After we did that, I walked up to Broadway, and I had blood all over my hands, and an EMS worker came up. She thought I'd been injured, and I said, "No, it's somebody else's blood." And so I sat. She said, "Sit down." And she came over, and she was washing the blood off my hands. And I looked at her, and I remember saying, "What's going on?" And she looked at it, and she said, "I don't know. This is awful." And at that moment, I started to think about my parents who live in Lancaster. I realized, oh my God, they're seeing this on TV. I had left my cell phone up in the office, so I started going up to people that I saw with cell phones, because there were still street phones at that time, and the lines were too long, so I was just going up, and phones weren't working, and people wouldn't let me use theirs, so I started to walk north. I was a couple blocks north, and I ran into a restaurant, and I just ran to their phone and picked it up, and I could only remember one phone number. A friend of mine, I remembered his work number, so I called him, and I said, "Billy, call my parents in Lancaster. Tell them I'm okay." And I hung up. And then as soon as I stepped out, I heard this tremendous sound, which was the North Tower collapsing. I remember looking back, I didn't know what was happening at the time. I just remember this huge wall of debris and smoke coming towards me, and I just started running. You know, I had never run so fast in my life, and I was able to outrun it. And then I kind of just slowed down, and at that time I lived up in Midtown Manhattan on 43rd Street. So I just started walking along with everybody else, kind of everybody in a daze, just walking. Nobody saying anything. And I remember as we got closer to Midtown and the Empire State Building, we all kind of just started veering to the left, you know, for fear that building was going to be hit. Because we didn't know what was going on. I was hearing, as we were walking up, people had car radios on, and I heard somebody say the Pentagon, Pennsylvania, and, you know, are we being attacked? We didn't know what was happening. But I made it back to my apartment, went in, sat down. It was kind of like, what do I do now? You know, I just did not know what to do. So what I did, I actually went to a 12-step meeting that I used to go to when I worked uptown. I went there, I knew the meeting would still be going on, and it was. And as I walked in, I heard a woman saying, "I'm worried about the people I know who work there." And she saw me, she said, "But one of them just came in." And I sat down and raised my hand, and for the first time, vocally put into words what I had just witnessed. And of course I was sobbing the whole time. And I remember a man, I didn't know who he was in a chef's jacket. I remember he took his chair and he brought it over, and he put his arm around me, and he kept it there through the whole meeting. And then afterwards, you know, people came up and were hugging me and holding me, and I did feel incredibly safe then. And then some people walked me home, and the night went on. I ended up not really even speaking to my parents till late that night. They had been trying to get through and couldn't. So I spoke with them, and my pattern, at least for the week after 9/11, I mean, I could barely sleep at night, and I slept with a light, my night light, my lamp on by my bed. I did that for about a year. And I'd get up every morning about 7, call my parents, and just cry. You know, that's all you could do. It was a very strange time, to say the least, to be in New York during that time, but an incredible sense of closeness, like we all collectively had just lost something or someone very important to us. You didn't even have to say anything, you just looked at people as you walked past them in the street, and you knew. You know, it truly united us. Of course, there's more stories to tell of what those weeks were like, but the one thing I did too, after the morning of 9/11, when I got up that morning, I had all these voice messages and all these emails from friends and family wanting to know if I was okay. And I sat at my computer, I was gonna just type a brief email and say I'm okay and send it out. But when I started typing, I started typing about the previous morning of what I had witnessed, what I'd seen, what I'd smelled, what I'd heard, the whole thing in detail. And I sent that out to everyone. They in turn sent that to people they knew. And I started getting emails, not only from friends and family, but from people I didn't even know, thanking me for telling them what it was like. And everyone encouraged me to keep writing. And so I did. Not every day, but I found writing was the best way for me to be able to express what I was feeling, what I was seeing. When we were allowed to finally get back to our job, our office building in November, I lasted about 2 weeks, and I had to quit it. Because every morning, as soon as I got up out of the subway, you could smell the smoke, it was still burning. And I just started crying. I did a lot of crying during those following weeks. Everyone did. And there was no shame to it at all. I mean, we all had just suffered a horrible loss. The city we loved had been attacked. And you walk through the city and see plastered everywhere pictures of people with the word missing, or have you seen? And you look at all these pictures, and for the first few days you wanted to believe, yeah, they're missing, maybe they're somewhere, but then ultimately you had to realize they're not missing, they're dead. And so the impact of how many people's lives were gone was just overwhelming. I remember going to a fire station that had lost members, and they had a memorial set up. I remember kneeling there, and somebody started singing some patriotic song. I can't even remember which one. Maybe God Bless America, I don't know. But we all started singing. That's the kind of unity we felt as a city. Once I quit my job, I continued the writing and found it very soothing, very healing. And then in the beginning of 2002, in January, one day, I just had a thought. I thought, I wonder if what I'm writing would make a theater piece, a play. So I took all I had written to someone I respected and said, "Could you read this and tell me what you think?" He read it, and he called me that night, and he said, "I think it would make a good play, and I'd like to direct it." So that was the birth of what became That Day in September, a one-man show that I worked on for 2 years, writing and rewriting and doing workshops, and ultimately doing it in LA and New York. And those 2 years were the most fulfilling years I think I've ever experienced, because I was doing something that was important. It was important for me to tell my story. I thought it was important for everyone to tell their stories, but for me, it was a way to honor all those people who died, to honor that man in the street, to honor two young guys who lived in my apartment building who died. It was a way to honor them. And when that all finally ended in August of '03, I thought, now what do I do? I couldn't go back to that job, and much to my surprise, I had the thought, I'll move to Lancaster. Now, I didn't grow up here, but my folks had retired here, and for the 26 years I was in New York, I would see them maybe 2 or 3 times a year, you know, for holidays and stuff. But the one good thing I have been able to salvage from 9/11 was a renewed appreciation for my family. They became my top priority. So I moved here, no job, no car, no place to live. I just needed to be close to my folks. And I started to establish a life here in Lancaster. And it was kind of only then, once I was away from New York, once I was no longer on a stage telling my story, that the emotions inside started to come to the surface. And I started what I had put off. I started the grieving process, mourning, grieving first and foremost for everyone who died, grieving for the city that I loved, and grieving for the life that I lost, because though, thank God, I am physically here to tell you this story, the person that I was on September the 10th, that person no longer exists, you know, and I'm still trying to figure out who I am and how I relate to the world. I mean, the things I thought were important aren't. I question my faith. I question fate. I'm just re-examining everything, even after all this time, you know, about what life should mean for me. I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I found a therapist here who specializes in that. And I've been working with her, and you know, I kind of became almost isolated. I mean, I had a job, I would go through my daily routine, but 9/11, even though I wasn't in New York, 9/11 was with me every day. And I still think of it every day to some extent. You know, perhaps not as strongly, but, you know, a passing thought, or sometimes an image that just comes in front of my head, or someone earlier had asked me about triggers. I'll hear sirens, and I just kind of go back to that moment in time, and I kind of just shut myself off from the world. I felt guilty that I had survived and others didn't, and felt I had no right to enjoy my life, you know, which is a strange way of thinking, but as I said, it was the grieving process for me, and it literally took 10 years, I'd say, for me to get to the point where I feel